This week, the 9/11 Memorial Museum and Gift Shop opened where the Twin Towers once stood tall. It was an emotional experience for many. For some, it was the validation and commemoration of loved ones that were lost, and for others, it wasn't enough. Former FDNY Deputy Chief Jimmy Riches joined me earlier this week to talk about losing his own son in the terrorist attacks, saying the gift shop was, quote, making money off my son's dead body. Well, Emmy Award-winning journalist and author Allison Gilbert joins me now to talk about her response to the gift shop and memorial and her piece for the Huffington Post, Why I'm Giving It All to the National September 11th Memorial and Museum. Welcome, Allison. Thanks so much for joining me.
Thank you so much.
Absolutely. So, Chief Riches, his comments prompted you to write this piece for the Huffington Post, this blog post. Talk to me about how his comments affected you and what you were thinking about when you wrote.
Well, I get it. I was there. It was a horrendous day for all of us. I am in no way comparing my experience to his. He lost his son. That is a great grief. What I've decided to do is not be in that space where I feel like I can't move forward in the sense of giving everyone access to a story that really impacted us all. And so what I've tried to do very well, and this is not to say what he's doing is wrong, because I really, like I said in the piece I wrote for the Huffington Post, everyone responds differently. But what I've tried to do is give all of the rights back to this book that I wrote, so in perpetuity we can keep his son's memory alive. We can keep the memory alive of all of us who were impacted that day, including the nearly 3,000 people who died.
Yeah, absolutely. I just want to pull up a quote from your piece regarding Deputy Riches' feelings. You wrote, I understand those feelings. I came very close to dying that day. I was a producer at WNBC TV and was pounded into the ground by a wall of crushed glass, cement, and debris. Soot and ash flooded my mouth, and I was certain I'd suffocate. I was taken to the hospital by ambulance. Doctors in the ER cut off my clothes and shoved tubes down my throat to help me breathe. You then bring up your son, who was 18 months at the time. How vivid is that day to you still?
It is so vivid, and like I said, I am so lucky that my son is alive. And so I'm not comparing stories in that sense. I'm appreciating where he's coming from.
Yeah.
You know, every day I'm lucky that my son's alive. He's in 8th grade now. I feel lucky that he's there. I almost didn't make it home, so I know I'm one of the lucky ones. And so when the museum asked me to be part of their exhibition, so I've donated the triage tag that was put around my neck that day. It's on display. I got to see it Monday night when donors were allowed to, not donors' money, but donors of artifacts got to go into the museum before it opened, so we can kind of experience our own story again in a museum setting. It was really hard. Yeah. It's hard to come face to face with that experience. And I chose not to bring my son, who really could have come. He's 14 at the time, and it was recommended to me by curators of the museum, see it yourself, process it yourself, and then, you know what, the museum is not going away. Bring him later. And that's really the point. The museum is not going away, so why not turn this book into something even of more good and have it give back? So in that store that's now so controversial, I want this book to be sold there. I want those royalties to support the programs in that museum. Absolutely. I want this book to support the exhibitions.
I would say I completely agree with you, and I would say that this book is the most correct thing that should be sold there. This book makes sense to be sold there. Yeah. What people are really upset about is the sort of kitschy tchotchkes that are in the store. The stuffed search and rescue dogs, the United We Stand blankets. You know, this is the kind of thing, Covering Catastrophe is the kind of thing that should be in a gift shop that is a memorial for a tragedy. You know, how do you feel about those other elements, or this being sold next to those other things in the gift shop?
Listen, I do not envy the decisions that museum, the officials have to make. This is, I mean, imagine building a museum 13 years in the public domain where every step that you take is being scrutinized, right? Because you're building a museum in real time. Everyone who's going to that museum probably has some real-time experience of living through that event, either in person or through a loved one or through a friend or at home. So it's our collective story. It's hard to make these choices. What I do know, without taking apart each object, because there's a lot of things in that store, but if we can collectively decide that there should be a place that pays tribute to this exceptional experience that we all shared as a community, right, the American community, and somehow there needs to be income to support the programs, to support the exhibitions, It's hard. These are hard choices, and I think we'll probably have more when new items come into the museum too. But ultimately, we want to honor those who died, and there's an amazing room at the museum in one of the exhibition spaces where you sit there, and it's really this quiet memorial space with all the pictures of all the victims who died. And you can't help but being really invested in that time, in that space. And that's what I want to celebrate. I want to celebrate the fact that those who survived are there, and those who survived can then remember those who didn't.
One of the other things that Chief Riches brought up, and another family member that I had on brought up that they were upset with, that wasn't the gift shop, was the memorial downstairs.
Yeah.
In the downstairs.
Yes, I saw it. No, I saw it. Yep.
Yes. Mm-hmm. The issue that they had was that their family's remains were back there, and that in order for them to visit the remains of their loved one, they have to go through the museum. And that to them was uncomfortable, and it was unfortunate. And as you just said, going through the museum yourself was kind of heartbreaking.
Yes.
While it's a wonderful memorial, it is also very tragic, and it's like reliving that tragedy.
Yes.
And for them, they want to be able to see their family members without having to relive that tragedy. Where do you fall on that?
I think it's an interesting question. I think the one part of the equation that I would raise is that there's something to me that will be very empowering, bringing my children through that museum to find that artifact that is mine, that it's in that, plexiglass, case with my narrative next to it. And when you go to the museum, my oral history is on the little audio tour. When you go through there's going to be something very gratifying to share with my children what their mom went through.
Absolutely.
And so for me, and again, I'm not in his shoes. I can't walk in those shoes to tell you how I did not lose someone on 9/11. I know that my experience is very different than his. But maybe we can reframe it and look at the opportunity that could be available to show your loved ones where this person died. Yeah. And maybe choose to commemorate their life in addition somewhere else, not instead of, but in addition to that, it's above ground, because that's really been the bone of contention, that it should not be below ground. Yeah. So maybe there's an addition to instead of the instead of, and I don't know. There is no perfect solution, I'm sure.
Do you look forward to the day that you can bring your son and show him everything in there?
I definitely do. When the memorial was opened up in the plaza, I brought both of my children there to show them around. When the museum was under construction, I went without them with my hard hat and my vest on to go see what the space was going to look like. So I was prepared, in a sense, to go back to the museum now that it was fully constructed. But I take ownership of that day. I try to use what happened to me that day for hopefully the betterment of keeping that history alive. I wrote the book. I've donated to charities. I've wanted to give back to the museum so they can keep those programs open in perpetuity. I desperately wanted my experience to mean something, right? Yeah. Or else, what was it all for? It was a horrible day, and I thought the way I processed it, I wanted to give back.
By giving it external meaning, does that help you make internal sense of it?
100%. As a writer, putting down on paper words it's so cathartic. It's like after the attacks, I was told by a police officer to make myself vomit. I had so much soot in my lungs that she told me, make yourself vomit, get it all out of your lungs, sneeze, cough, do whatever you can to get it out. And I kind of find writing to be a verbal way of doing the same thing. I got it all out of my system. And I felt like by incorporating the other journalists who are in the book, and there are some really famous ones like Tom Brokaw and Brian Williams and Ann Compton, who was on the plane with the President of the United States on Air Force One that day, we all collectively needed to vent. It was like reporters don't normally share the story. Yeah. We're supposed to be dispassionate, right? We're supposed to kind of have that sense of space. But this was different, right? We were involved in the story. We were eyewitnesses. We were participants. And in some cases, we were victims. Yeah. And so I feel like it was different. And writing for me has definitely helped.
Absolutely. Well, Allison, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you.
Talking to me here. And you can find her piece, as well as her book, Covering Catastrophe, in our resource well below. Stick around. We got a lot more coming up on HuffPost Live.